Top 5 Pac-12 questions. Now that, today was just a barrage of weird stuff, right? Or of I don't know, some clarification, some more confusing. So I'll just start with this one. All right, so what happens next? What do we have to wait for? Are we going to hear about expansion? Are we going to hear about who's really in this bidding? Are somebody going to confirm anything? I'm starting to get a little, sometimes I have clarity and sometimes I'm confused. So what should we expect next from all of this?
I don't know that we're supposed to expect anything.
Yeah.
I think that might be part of the issue, is that people are expecting a resolution when there's not one that's necessarily in the works. But you're right that some of the back and forth reporting, for whatever reason, has really muddied the situation. There was the thought that yesterday would be potentially big day, and that turned out to not be the case. And now it's, oh no, these things take time. And yeah, it's confusing. And I think a lot of people have confirmation bias. So if, Jason Scheer says something, they believe that and believe nothing that the Johns say, and vice versa, or throw in what Dennis Dodd or, whoever it may be. So yeah, it's hard to wade through and sort through. And the thing of it is there are a lot of people that are kind of waiting for that finality, and that might not be in the cards anytime soon, fellas. You do realize this could go on
for months,
months longer. Yeah. And so that remains to be seen, obviously. And that's why, you're asking the question that you're asking. But yeah, I think that they just keep meeting, and what's next is they finally iron out a deal. But my biggest interest in this entire thing, it truly is, do they add SMU and San Diego State part of this? Because that changes a lot for those two programs, and that changes a lot in terms of your comparisons. And that's the piece that when Canzano put that out there last week about Tuesday, and then flirted with the idea of, possibly they announce expansion first, and then, or they announce a deal and then they announce expansion or whatever. That part of it was what I was most intrigued by, and I haven't seen any indication that's going one way or the other, more so than it was last week.
Jim Williams mentioned earlier today, and it was, I believe, either an email, it was a tweet earlier today about what people need to stop doing, and some of those who are trying to say where the Pac-12 might be, is the deadlines. Now, the president of Arizona kind of brought up April 15th, but saying that there was going to be a meeting on Tuesday, and it's Wednesday, and everyone gets all hot and bothered by it. I think it's time to stop working or saying deadlines. And at some point, one day, we're going to wake up and there's either going to be something that's good enough to keep everything together or it's not. And then we start, well, here we go.
Well,
talk about dominoes effect.
It's interesting that Craig mentioned it could go on forever. So number 4 is, will it be done in April? I mean, is that a reasonable time period? Because that's the next CEO meeting, and then they don't even have to vote on things.
The Arizona president brought that up. He brought up April 15th, I believe, in one of the articles from a week ago.
I mean, all of this seems very confusing. I'm very confused.
Good-looking calendars.
Yeah.
I mean, it's confusing, and it's not. Again, that I think that what kind of threw chum in the waters was the big PR response. Mm-hmm. That was great. It shut up, I guess, whoever you were trying to shut up from the Big 12 for a couple of days. But what it also did was it put out expectations. It put out expectations that you were going to have a better deal with more money. Everyone was going to be happy. It would be, soon and all these things. And it's well, when that doesn't happen, in that little mini time frame that was mentioned, then, yeah, it's all of a sudden whoa, wait a second. So, yeah, I mean, people – I guess it just depends on your expectations, but I don't know. And if it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 3, what does this mean for the future of sports TV? So if they go mostly streaming and they bet on this, and let's say they get in the water before everyone else, say this is the line that the Pac-12 cuts. I mean, if DirecTV had gone along with their plan for the networks in the first place, they wouldn't be having any of these problems at all.
No.
But it didn't work. It wasn't as planned. The Pac-12's, I think, problem is not innovation. They certainly have some of that. Larry Scott had some of that for all of his faults. It is now maybe a pathological sense of that there's some order to some of this stuff, or that what's plan B if your wild plan of innovation doesn't work? when Edison invented the light bulb, there were a bunch of different ways that didn't work. So we had a plan B. He didn't just go, okay, this is the only way this is going to work. If it doesn't, I quit. Well, what's that? And then if it does, to that end, if it does work, then how does this start changing everything?
Yeah, no.
Is this what makes streaming more profitable for people? It hasn't been that way for ESPN just yet, but part of that might be ESPN not putting good product out there on their ESPN Plus app. So when you've been forced to watch a game on ESPN Plus and the production value isn't good, you're like, well, why do I have to pay for this? Why don't I just go to a bar and watch it or something?
There was the one disastrous broadcast of Texas State in 2021. But for the most part, it's not like it's flawless, but it seems like it's gotten better, the games that I've watched on ESPN Plus, and not just Baylor. I'm talking about some of the others. There's going to be some things that aren't the same.
I would say it's a pretty universal complaint, though, about their quality of especially those lower third-tier games. But what does it mean for the future of sports TV? Like, how much could it change it if it does work?
Mm-hmm. If it works, then they'll be ahead of the curve. And if they're ahead of the curve, that's wonderful, because it appears as if, at least based on whoever you watch, follow, and believe, that they might be well behind the curve, because you were talking about what's next?
Yeah, well, and again, their problem with the Pac-12 networks was they thought for sure that DirecTV would eventually go for it. They did not, and eventually just quit taking their call. And so then they were stuck with this forever, knowing that DirecTV was never going to pick it up and distribute it to the way they needed it to. Number 2, how do Amazon and Apple split this if they're going to share it? I'm curious about that. Where are a lot of things housed? Amazon seems to, do you mirror the NFL package, or do you maybe do a little bit bigger just because this might be a little bit cheaper? Not be a little bit cheaper, it'll be a lot of bit cheaper. And maybe you can get some more things on there. Or does Apple want all but this one game and all of that? And then, of course, going into number 1, we can kind of talk about these in tandem. Who is the linear partner in the end of all this, because there's going to have to be some of that distribution as well.
That started out another one of those back and forth on Twitter with a lot of people reporting that Fox is out, some saying no, and then some saying that ESPN is out. I know that some of those that in our premium section have said that both are out at this particular time, but you can't really report that because, as somebody mentioned, by the time you do, then someone could be back in because perhaps they can get in at a cheaper price.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm curious to see. Doesn't affect me one way or the other, quite honestly. So I'm enjoying the fact that it's not as nasty, or maybe I'm just avoiding it more, that it's not as nasty as the tail end of last week. It was kind of just getting weird. Would y'all agree with that?
No.
I mean, it was getting oddly personal and just kind of strange, and
still in some people's minds, it's still too personal.
So maybe I'm just avoiding it better. But I think there's still some of that trash talking and whatnot that goes back and forth. But I've tried to kind of say over and over the last couple of days, I'm as interested in this just because of the implications moving forward as anything. So if you're able to swing a major streaming deal, what's the domino effect of that? How does that change how I'm watching TV in 5 years? Plugging into an Oklahoma State versus TCU game versus what I'm doing now, which is probably flipping on ABC or FS1 or whatever. That could be a shift in the landscape. So I'm curious. I'm curious to see who all is involved, just like everybody else, and we'll just keep waiting and seeing. And at some point, there's going to have to be a decision, although it's clearly not come as quickly as a lot of people would have liked it to have.
Okay, NCAA tournament is going into the second weekend. You had games on